In the wake of the Acolyte being cancelled due to low viewership, and people complaining about so-called bigots winning, and the fact that they'll never know what happens next, I have to point out that you do know there's plenty to hold you over, right? The Acolyte is not remarkable or special in any way. It was made off the poorly selling High Republic era, and it's worth noting that there's actually going to be tie-in material to the Acolyte, even though the show itself was cancelled. The first of which is the topic of today's video, a Kelnacca one-shot comic published by Marvel that was marketed as the backstory from the hit Disney Plus series. I found it absolutely laughable that they called the Acolyte a hit series, given how poorly it did and how much it was ridiculed. Either this description was written prior to the show coming out and they just thought it was going to be a hit, or they just said it as a pure PR tactic. It's an absolute joke, but the point I'm making is that if you really want more, I'd suggest reading the entirety of the High Republic. The series is selling poorly anyways, so they'd absolutely need your support if you want more stories like the Acolyte. I already have a negative stereotype that most Acolyte fans are filthy casuals who judge Star Wars based on a more accessible range like movies, shows, and games, and it's a stereotype that's rarely broken. But I guess since the High Republic novels require extensive reading skills, except not really, since all the novels have audiobooks in fact, they couldn't get outside their comfort zone to save their lives. Honestly, this just goes to demonstrate how much of a failure the High Republic is. Terrible idea, terrible execution, and terrible results. Very few people care about the High Republic, and the only good story that features the High Republic was Jedi Survivor, a story that isn't even set in the High Republic, but rather more of a callback story. That's how you know Disney done goofed. So yeah, a large purpose of this video was for me to point this out to Acolyte fans, who endlessly begged for a season 2 and didn't get it. Because if you're that much of a fan of the show, you could absolutely read the endless High Republic slop that came before, that the Acolyte was trying to be a part of at the end of the day. I'm frankly not interested in the High Republic, and besides, even if I was, I've got a lot of catch up to do. And since the series I hear is consistently shit, and open to ridicule just like the Acolyte, I'm probably only going to touch it once the expanded universe content dries up. Another reason I'm making this video is that pretty much only Disney shills would review something like this. So I wanted to make a review from the perspective of someone who hates the current state of Star Wars and the Acolyte. It's unironically a more unbiased review than what you'll get from Star Wars Explained, who shills for anything and everything with Star Wars on the cover. So without further ado, let's take a look at the Kelnacca comic. As the least prominent of the 4 Jedi from the Acolyte, I suppose the character desperately needed some characterization, but I would have suggested they make more than just one issue. A one-shot seemed like a very bad idea to me, because I haven't been much of a fan of Star Wars short stories, and it's not just a Disney problem. Star Wars Tales, for example, had a lot of short stories that felt like they ended abruptly and didn't have enough room to breathe. The Kelnacca comic basically tells the story of some red alien dickhead on his deathbed with an apprentice with incomplete training, and he seizes the opportunity before he becomes one with the Force or whatever to tell his Padawan about his own master, and how his training was incomplete with his original master. If I ever had a criticism the first time I read this, it's that the art style is rather silly, and it resulted in a story I could not take seriously. Like when Red Alien Dickhead is assigned to Kelnacca as his new master, the look on Kelnacca's face honestly made me chuckle. Being used to Star Wars Republic and Legacy for good artwork, I was taken out of the story with absurd facial expressions characters gave in this comic. The dialogue is also not very serious. And in fact, if this was not a comic but a short on Disney Plus, I imagine the lines would be ridiculed. The only page that looked cool was this, where there's a lot of clear-cut action, and it looks great to look at. That's perhaps the closest this comic comes to resembling Republic or Legacy. But then, of course, the comic just devolves into looking too silly once again. In fact, I was reminded of a certain meme when a random fuck-off character asks Red Alien Dickhead, "Forget the Wookiee."
What are those?
Once again, I think the one-shot approach was a mistake, as the story just breezes by without any room to grow, and by the time I was done reading it, I was left feeling empty. What the hell was the point of all that? I guess unlike the Acolyte, there was nothing objectively stupid about it that destroys Star Wars lore, but that's not saying much. I can say at the very least that this came across as a more honest attempt at telling a story. I guess since this wasn't a Disney Plus show, but a comic that would be read by very few. At the end, there's an interview included with Juna Suetamo, the body actor for Kelnacca, and it was a bore to read. It literally starts with that whole "I've always wanted to be a Jedi since I was a kid" approach, which is not saying anything new. And I felt like I've seen this kind of thing a million times beforehand. So yeah, that's my overview of the Kelnacca comic. I certainly do not recommend it. Is it better than the Acolyte? Hell yeah. But what isn't better than the Acolyte? I guess I'm not a fan of one-shot comics anyways. But this comic felt uninspired and just something that had to be there as tie-in material for the Acolyte. And whoever wrote it got stuck, because how are you supposed to make a comic based on the Acolyte? Especially on some largely unimportant character that served next to no purpose, aside from the flashbacks, and leading to the terrible episode 5 in which they stupidly kill off Jecki and Yord. So I'm not going to waste any more time talking about this crap. Nothing was gained, and I basically wasted like 5 minutes of my life reading this comic. At the very least, I hope the ad revenue will be enough to sustain me. I'm JJ Plagiarisms, and until next time, what are stories but mystery boxes?
Under the mountain.